going to go ahead and answer that question. For chronic pain, what has become of the MTUS 2016 chronic pain guidelines, which featured a frozen version of the ODG guidelines? Effective December 1st, when the ACOEM updates, or when the MTUS is updated with the most current ACOEM guidelines, then the ACOEM chronic pain guideline will become effective. Now, what happens to that frozen version? It just like any other time we do a regulatory update with these guidelines, the DWC will no longer use it. Obviously, if it's the most recent version of the ODG guidelines, if you're searching for treatments that either are not covered by the current ACOEM chronic pain guideline, or if you want to challenge the MTUS's presumption of correctness, if that 2016 ODG guideline is still their most current version, obviously you can still use it to possibly rebut the MTUS's presumption of correctness.
I see there's another question about which asks, are postoperative care guidelines covered in ACOEM practice guidelines, or does one have to refer to ODG? So the answer is that postoperative care guidelines are covered in the ACOEM treatment guidelines, and this will be a change somewhat in the structure of the MTUS. As many of you may know, we had a separate document covering postoperative care, largely around physical therapy visits postoperatively, and now instead of having a single document that covers all of the PT recommendations around postoperative care, one will go to the individual ACOEM treatment guideline that covers that procedure and find the recommendations there.
Also have guides on DME. It should be in the respective guidelines. Ray, do you want to cover that?
Sure. So there's another question if ACOEM also has guides on DME or durable medical equipment, and yes, that is covered in the various ACOEM guidelines.
If a URL link to the guideline will suffice as evidence as opposed to copying and pasting the narrative of the recommendations. At this point in time, as far as our regulations are concerned, our regulations are still requiring the cutting and pasting of the particular section of the guideline that contains that recommendation. It is something that we will be working on in the next go-around of our regulatory updates. Obviously, I couldn't cover that in this go-around because the updates to the MTUS were limited to evidence-based updates, so limited to the new guidelines. So at this point, you do still need to cut and paste. Now, if you're a utilization review organization or IMR organization, could you potentially deny it because you failed to cut and paste? No, you can't do that. So keep in mind, you are an IMR reviewers have an obligation to go ahead and conduct their own searches as well. And I would guess that if it's cited, then they should be able to find that particular study. Questions?
Sorry.
There was a question that asked, basically the question was, what if a UR reviewer only has access to the old MTUS and the old guidelines contained and not the new ones? And obviously UR and IMR reviewers will be expected to have current versions of the MTUS and the treatment guidelines, and to base their decisions, as appropriate on the new guidelines.
Also, will recommendations in the chronic pain guidelines take precedence over the clinical topics chronic recommendations? No, they should be consistent with each other, and as far as taking precedence is concerned, I don't think there's going to be any conflicts between the two.
There's another question that asks if the postoperative ACOEM recommendations will address the frequency and duration of visits. I assume PT visits like the old MTUS did. In general, the answer to that is yes. Obviously the recommendations are based on the evidence review that ACOEM has done. But in general, there will be recommendations on the duration and number.
There's a question: do we now access ACOEM first instead of the MTUS, or are all the ACOEM to be integrated into the MTUS? The first, as the medical evidence search sequence mandates, the first place you have to take a look at is the MTUS. Now, this is a difficult concept for some people, because what happens is once the MTUS adopts ACOEM, which we plan on doing, then that becomes part of the MTUS. So the first place you need to look at is the MTUS, which will contain the ACOEM guidelines. Now, are all of ACOEM going to be integrated into the MTUS? No, I don't believe that all of the ACOEM guidelines will be integrated. But at this point, I'm not aware of any guidelines that we aren't planning on, any ACOEM guidelines that we aren't planning on incorporating into the MTUS.
This is Lucy. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Thank you. So I will just point out that when the effective date occurs, so on December 1st, we actually will have a section of under resources that's called state guidelines, and then you can navigate to California, and we will have a version guideline that is just specific to California. So only those guidelines that California has adopted from ACOEM will be available. Everything that we did, so all of the, the searching, the navigating through those guidelines, all of that will stay the same. We just wanted to make sure that users knew that, this was the MTUS. So I'm sorry that I didn't show that, but that will be available so that users are sure that they are accessing the MTUS information.
Lucy, if you're able to hear me, there was a question regarding the anticipated release date for the ACOEM, the new version of the ACOEM mental health chapter. I don't know if you have any updates or anything you can share on that, but I thought I'd pass that on if you do have anything to share.
Sure, great, thank you. So we are currently working on that guideline right now, and we had our first panel meeting in April. When we create a new guideline, it takes us about 18 months from start to finish. However, with the mental health guideline, we do plan to release the information in modules. So rather than waiting to the end of 2018 when we're all done, we're going to be releasing as we complete different sections. So, for example, our panel is working on post-traumatic stress disorder right now. We're going to move on to depression and anxiety, and we are going to be packaging those up, putting them, through external review, the whole process that they normally would go through. But that will allow us to be able to release information a little bit sooner. And as we get, more information on, exactly when those release dates are, we'll make that available. When a guideline is completed and before it's released on the website, there is a section, I didn't click on it, that is on the menu. So under resources, ACOEM guidelines, you have the methodology, you have the foundations, you have the disorders, and then there's another section called proposed updates. That's when we have guidelines that are have completed external review, and we're posting them online, but they haven't yet been integrated into our online tools and navigation. So, for example, right now we have a guideline on traumatic brain injury. So as that information gets ready and is queued up, that's where it goes.
There have been a number of questions regarding citation requirements. The citation requirements are set forth in our regulations in 9792.21.1, little d. Now, can you cite, let's say, for example, how do you cite the ACOEM guidelines in the RFA from MD guidelines? That's the question. How do you cite the ACOEM guidelines in the RFA from MD guidelines? Again, look at that regulatory section. It's not very specific, actually, as far as what you need to cite. All you need to do is, if you're rebutting the MTUS, you need to indicate that you're rebutting the MTUS, and then indicate that it is part. It's from the. I'm sorry. How do you cite the ACOEM guidelines in the RFA from MD guidelines? So all you would need to do is put down the ACOEM guideline title. So, for example, if you want to cite something from the cervical and thoracic spine disorders guideline, just indicate it's ACOEM cervical and thoracic spine disorders. And if you will notice in the DWC posting, we put down the effective date of those particular guidelines. So that's all you would really need to put down. You don't need to put down the date, or I'm sorry, the page number or anything specific like that.
Let me also make a general comment. I see a handful of questions, asking about very specific treatments or diagnoses and whether they're covered or not. And while I wish I had the sort of memory that could provide those answers, I don't. Although that's one reason why we're providing this 1 month period for people to get familiar with the guidelines. So, I'd encourage anyone with real specific questions about what the guidelines may or may not cover or may not recommend to review the applicable guideline and find that out.
Lucy, if you can answer the question about the cutting and pasting from the MD guidelines.
I was wrong. She can.
I am unable to see the questions, but if you read it to me, I'd be happy to answer it.
Okay, the question is, will information on the MD guidelines have cut and paste availability? So can you cut it and paste?
Yes, absolutely. You sure can.
Okay, so that takes care of a number of questions.